briefly I want to talk about the equipment that I'm going to be utilizing to butcher both of these fish. You'll notice that it's not a lot of equipment, but this setup here is typically how I have a lot of my cooks keep their equipment throughout the day. If they're working in a smaller environment, sometimes it will be in a shotgun pan, but nevertheless you want to have all of your equipment on a mise en place tray. Very briefly, I have a German stainless steel a Victorinox flexing slicing knife. This is probably about a $40 knife. It's fairly inexpensive. I have a lot of really expensive knives, but I can tell you that this knife and several knives that I have in my collection like this are what I call my workhorse knives, and the one that I truly do a lot of work with. You definitely need a pair of tweezers when you're doing most fish, especially any fish that you're going to be taking pin bones out of. I have found that this variety, I think this is actually an electrician's pair of pliers, and I use them as tweezers, are probably the best route that I've found to go in. If you do buy them, make sure that you do get teeth on the end. That is very important. And these probably cost about $20. If you want to get online, Messer Meister makes a far inferior product for about probably 60 bucks. But I would strongly recommend just going to your local hardwood store and sanitizing and using that. Okay? And then also you'll notice on here just a basic teaspoon. I'll show you what that's for here in a little bit. And then I use a bench knife. I like this style of a bench knife because it can fit right under your cutting board. The bench knife in this case is utilized strictly for sanitation and cleaning purposes, or cleaning rather, not sanitation. I also have just a few nicely folded kitchen side towels, some extra black latex gloves. I like latex over nitrile. We do have both in the kitchen. Also, and most importantly, have both of your sanitation. Okay, red always is for sanitation liquid. We use a Quat sanitizer. It's an ammonia-based sanitizer here in all of our kitchens, and then just a standard kitchen soap in green bucket. So again, very important that you have all of those before you start. Okay, so first in picture, this is the West Ross salmon. That again is an Atlantic variety. We also at times use Faro Island, Verlasso occasionally. I'm not a huge fan of that. But we try to buy almost all of our fish here at the club in a whole format. Now, there are certain banquets and certain settings, absolutely, I will be the first to tell you that we do buy sides from time to time when our volume is great, but I still believe in inculcating a lot of traditional butchery in the kitchens, and that is lost if you don't force your folks to buy whole fish. So here at the Landings Club, we really try to push whole proteins wherever and whenever possible. So again, to start this demonstration, before we actually get into the butcher, I want to talk very briefly about checking qualitative things on your salmon. First and foremost, you want to use your nose and your fingers and your eyes. They're going to be your best friends when it comes to actually being able to determine if this is a good fish or not. First with your nose. Obviously, we all know what stinky fish, smells like. This should smell almost like the ocean, nice, fresh, and clean, which it does. Secondly, while touching it, as you can see when I press in on the flesh, it pops back out, okay? It doesn't stay in. If it stays in, that means that the fish is older and that the protein, the actual muscle, is starting to break down, okay? So that's a bad thing. If it springs back, good thing. Also, check up under the gills. The gills are typically the first thing that rot after the guts are taken out. Okay, you ever heard the phrase, the head stinks from the head, the fish stinks from the head down? This is where it starts. So if it's going to start rotting, this is where it's going to start first. So you want to check there. Also, the eyes will be your good friend. If the eyes look cloudy and transparent, the fish is starting to age. You can see that there's no color in the eyes here. Lastly, if you want to tell the difference, the best and one of the only definitive ways, there are several ways actually, but the most definitive way I can tell the difference between an Atlantic salmon and a true king or a West Coast salmon, king salmon, is the color of its tongue. See the color here? This is white. That can tell me definitively, without equivocation, this is an Atlantic salmon. Okay? So, without any further ado, we are going to start. Just a few things that I was taught when I did this first within Butchery that I would like to impart with each of you. The best thing to do to work safe is to have a clean dry board and a clean dry fish. That's again why I have the bench knife that you'll see that I'll be utilizing from time to time to keep my board specifically clean and dry. Now, first step I'm going to be doing is taking both sides of the salmon off. While I start with my butchery, I use the entirety of the knife. I come up under the fin here, and I'm going to come up under and back all the way to the head of the salmon. Tommy, if you want to try, this might be a good time to get a little bit of a close-up. Okay. So, come in straight, and I'm trusting the knife. Okay, I can feel it. It's gone all the way into the head. I turn, and now I feel the knife. It's directly on the spine. So now that I've hit the spine, I know that I'm ready to go. And this is the part that is probably the hardest for young culinarians to learn. You have to trust yourself, and once you're there, you've just got to let it go. Okay? Come up under here, and straight down in one motion, straight across. And as you're lifting the fillet up, you have to be delicate with this. This is like a little baby. Okay? Now when I bring this back, you can see that I did a good job. When I check with my chefs to see when they're doing it, I can tell instantly if they did a good or a bad job by looking at the spine. You can tell I applied even pressure the whole way, and I've now taken off the first side. Okay. Again, I'm going to reiterate, clean dry board and a clean dry fish. Okay. Now, here we are, we're going to go and taking off the second side, and again, okay, you don't beat the fish up. A lot of times, when you see folks that when you have fish, and thankfully I don't have a good example to show you, but when the muscle structure comes apart here, almost always it's because the fish was mishandled. Okay? And it's usually by the chef or by the fishmonger or the cook who's butchering it. Okay? So, and it's always usually from mishandling. Now, to take off the second side, again, I'm right-handed, so I always like to kind of work away from me. And again, for the third time, clean dry board and a clean dry fish. That's how you work and stay safe. Okay? And I use one rag. When I do my butchery, typically, I like to have one rag that I keep as a dirty rag. And then also, like I said, I do use my bench knife, but you'll start seeing where I use that more once we actually start getting into the sides. Okay? So to take off the second side, I'm going to do the same thing I just did, except just in reverse. Now here, you hear that? That tells me that I'm right on the spine, and I know that I'm there. And now, this is why I like a large knife. And some folks have a problem if they can't get down to the bottom. They can't get to the bottom of the fillet because the angle of the knife. Make sure that you own your environment. All you have to do is move the board. Okay? Don't suffer or struggle in silence. Just move the board. Okay, so now I'm there again. Same thing, straight down. Okay? And again, you see, nice, beautiful, but this one, not quite as nice. There you can see I didn't do a good job. I lifted the knife right there versus this side. So, not perfect, but it's almost by design. And I'll show you the first piece that I have to use of my equipment outside of my knife is a spoon. Part of my mise en place, you'll see here, we have unusable trim and usable trim. So first we're going to utilize this usable trim. This is why you see the spoon, the natural curvature of the spoon fits right into the spine, and we can scrape all of that beautiful belly meat off here. Let me make sure I'm doing something useful. Here at the club, we have a full sushi program. I have a master sushi chef. And he would tell you that a lot of times, us in the West, we throw away the best part of the fish, the belly, a lot of time. Because I tend to square off some of my fillets, and we use the belly more as trim, or this could be a lovely tartare. Or we save this and it goes in inventory, and that helps offset my food cost. And then we'll save it till we have 50 or 60 pounds. And then I'll take it to my butcher shop and we'll make salmon cakes, or a salmon sausage, or a numerative things that we can utilize to make specials, to help offset our food costs, but also properly utilize all of this product. Okay? Now again, I'm going to do the same thing on the back side here. And now all that's beautiful, usable trim. Okay? And then for the sake of this demo, I wanted to keep this here so you could see all of the scrap here. Okay. And in certain cuisines or certain instances, we could even utilize that to make salmon head soup or things of that nature, but in a classical setting, salmon really is not a type of fish that you want to save the bones to make fish stock or fume because it's just too strong. So with that, I'm going to clean my board off and then we'll get ready and load it on the next step of the demo. Now in this portion of the demo, I'm going to show you how to remove, basically take this to a full portion that's restaurant ready. We will be removing the rib cage, the additional spinal bone that was left on, all of the pin bones, the skin, the bloodline. We will portion and then further show which scrap is, again, more usable scrap, and then be able to show you from start to finish on this one side. I'm going to leave the second side, which is right here, for later because I don't want to take up too much time during this video. Okay? Now again, I'm right-handed. I can't reiterate enough. If you're left-handed, do it the way that you feel comfortable, right? Or if you're right-handed, you don't have to do everything exactly the way that I do, but just remember the fundamentals of what we're doing here, okay? Tommy, can you get this up here? You see, okay, so when you see this meat right here, this is fin meat that was left on from having the knife angle very close down, so some of the knife caught some of the fin meat. So what I'm going to do is first remove that fin meat, utilizing the back portion of my knife first. I can always usually tell a rookie when they're doing salmon, and they do this, okay? You want to utilize the whole of your knife in even strokes, okay? Even if it's a bad stroke, meaning like you're making a mistake, make that mistake with confidence. Don't do this and kind of hack at the fish. That's not what we're looking for. We want nice, even strokes, you know? Something else to note, mentioning, a sharp knife is really your best friend with this. I know that Chef has, at this point in the career, already shown you all a few different ways, probably how to sharpen knives, but having a very sharp knife is key and probably one of the most important things. So now that I've taken off the fin meat, I'm going to now come to the belly, and I'm going to find here the ribs are attached to these bones called the pin bones, right? So first I'll find up top here the first pin bone, and again I don't start with the tip of my knife, okay? Start with the base of my knife, and I come down and I'm letting the knife right along the bones, and the angle that I'm using is actually an upward angle. If you see, Tommy, when you come in, I'm starting this way, but as I go down, the knife comes up, okay? And then eventually it comes up and then it flattens, and then I go here, okay? Now I've taken off the majority of the rib cage, and I've gotten almost all of the good belly. Okay. Now to take the spine. This does take some practice and some skill to not really cut into the meat. This is like driving a car, okay? Don't keep your eyes on here. Keep your eyes here, because this is what's going to ruin your meat. Okay. And now back this way. If you're not comfortable doing this, you could turn the board and get the fish from the other side, so it's always on your dominant side. However, getting some dexterity in the kitchen is something that you should all start working on in your knife skill set. Okay? If you do this really nice and almost perfectly, you don't even need your knife. Just like that, it just peels right off. See? But occasionally you might miss a little bit like I did there. That's quite all right. You can take your knife to it, and shouldn't be an issue there with that. Okay? Now, what I like to do here for this portion is I do turn the fish, because now we're getting ready to pin bone. All salmon, I don't know exactly what the count is, but all the pin bone goes about half or 2/3 of the way down the entirety of the fish. So, if you saw what I did with the back of my knife, some folks like to push the pin bones up. That definitely helps you remove so you can see the bones, so you can remove them faster. Some people like to use a cup with water. Some people like to use different tweezers, but I've found in a real setting that's not really feasible, because most chefs, myself included, I'm not going to ask you to do one side at a time. I'm going to ask you to do 8 or 10 or 12 sides. So I have a an awkward technique. If you see how I hold this knife, this is just something I've developed over a long time. And this helps me grab the bones. Keep in mind, the way that these bones are in the flesh or the way they need to come out, meaning the bone is not in like this in the fish. It is like this. So when you pull out this way, not up. Because if you pull up, that rips the flesh. Okay? So I grab and pull. There's the first bone, second, third, fourth, and then once you do this a lot, you can get kind of fast like this. Okay? Pull way down, and again, I'm trusting my vision, but I'm relying on my sense of touch. That's how I can tell if most of the bones are out. And in this case, when the bones come out, the bones do come out on a farm-raised fish a bit easier than a wild salmon. Sometimes you'll pull the bone and the bone will rip halfway. You must chase the bone. And I can show you, I don't think I'll be able to show you today because I probably won't have that example. But just because the tip of the bone came off doesn't mean that it's all out. That means that 3/4 of the bone are still in the flesh, waiting for your guest to get a nice surprise with their dinner. Okay, now I'm going to go back and literally sometimes I shut my eyes and I check and see, and I can feel there's 2 or 3 bones, and I actually left on a rib bone. You can see that was left on there, and I'm actually just going to pull him off there. And now all those, that's one side, all the bones just right in my hand, right into the unusable trim package, or trim box rather. Okay. Okay, now we've achieved pin boning this fish. Now, to the next step, and there's 2 ways that I train people to do this skinning. There's one way to help remove some of the bloodline so you're not having to do 2 things at one time, even though it lessens the yield of the fish. I'm not going to show you that way. I'm going to show you the traditional method and then how we then go back and clean the bloodline out. First and foremost, the most important thing, do not cut into the flesh. What I just cut into there was a little piece of tail meat. Tommy, can you see that? So none of that is really usable meat. It does give me something to hold on to. Some chefs like to cut a hole in here so they have some leverage. I don't think that that's necessary if your knife is sharp. And again, I bring this to the edge of the board. Also, you all can see, you see some of the scales that you're seeing on here? I ordered this fish to be scaled, and obviously it is not. So that's okay, and I'll show you how we can avoid having the scales on the fish, because sometimes that does happen. And scaling fish in a production kitchen that's not designed for it is a very, very filthy thing, and I actually don't do that in my kitchen very often outside of the sushi shop that has a small area specifically designed for that. Okay, so I come in here with my knife, and it's the angle that you need to be aware of, okay? It's not here, okay? It's not it's not here, it's not here. It's right at about 10 degrees, right here, okay? And I've come up under my fillet, and now I'm just gonna let the knife do the rest, some of the work, and then my left hand here is actually really pulling this fish and skinning it, okay? Now, just like the spine is your scorecard, you can also have a scorecard here, and you can see that there's no flesh on there really. So we know we did a pretty good job. Now again, all this is pretty much trash for the most part. Some folks at times could utilize these as, you could brine this, dehydrate it, and make a salmon chip or a salmon crisp. If I was doing a competition and I was trying to show utilization of product, I maybe would utilize it for that, but honestly that's about it. And in most of my kitchens, that just goes in the trash for the most part, unless we're doing a special wine dinner in which we have a need to do that. So, now back to the scales. Because that there are all these additional scales that I didn't know were there, I thought there was just a few residual when we first started. What I'm going to do in this phase now is do a quick clean down, and what I do is I'll take the sharp edge of my knife and quickly utilize that to clean up any of the scales in the fish. Not cutting through, just kind of giving them a little trim up. So, and then there, now I'll remove this back to my parchment lined sheet tray, and then I'm gonna wash all this down. And I would do that to each portion, every fillet, get them all skinned, then clean, and then come back and do the rest. Okay? So, since the last segment, I've cleaned the board down to ensure that the scales are not all over the flesh. And now we are going to move on to bloodlining this fish. I personally feel that this is one of the most important parts when serving salmon, especially in an a la carte setting. Also to note, when I go to portion this, I'm going to do what we call block cut. That is a standard cut that we utilize here at the club. We serve a 7-ounce salmon is our standard. Typically in most of the restaurants, I say typically because we have a lot of different venues, but that's typically our main standards is 7-ounce blood-lined block cut, i.e. not non-tranche cut and not cut straight across. You'll see what I'm talking about here in just a moment. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to bloodline this fish. This arguably is something that takes a fair amount of skill set and is a good way to really mess this fish up. So it takes a lot of practice, but there's only one way you get good at it. Okay, so here we start. If you saw, I moved the fish down already because I could tell that starting up here my knife was going to hit the sheet tray. So come in. I'm actually applying a significant amount of pressure downward on the knife to make this flesh pop up. If you can see that, you see a good angle there. So when the flesh pops up, that lets me get a good angle that I can bloodline this fish without cutting too much into the actual flesh of the fish. Now also noted, there's a line right here. That's where the spine was. That's what I'm using as my guide rail with the tip of my knife. And when I know I've gotten there, I then curve the knife down just a little bit because that's actually where the blood line is. All the rest of this other flesh that's darker is kind of a byproduct of being around the bloodline, and we're trying to remove most of that too, not all of it. Some of it's fat. Some of it is actually, some would argue it's good fat. Others like to remove it. I like to remove it, personally myself. Again, you'll see I went one way with the knife and then back the other. If you're not comfortable with that, you can turn the board so you're kind of always using your dominant hand or your dominant angle. And again, a similar technique as taking the spine off. With this now, my angle is 10 degrees going up, not down. So I don't want to cut into any of the flesh of the fish. You see that here? I got a little heavy-handed, but not too much. Almost all of that is bloodline. Many years ago, I was working for a chef who told me a story about, getting a lot of flack for some chefs didn't like to bloodline the fish. They think that it's a lot of a waste. If I weighed what I just cut off of this fish, it's probably a full portion. No, that's not. That's about 3.5 ounces or so here, right? But if that was on there, that would then percolate down and you would probably get a little bit of an extra piece. But we have a standard here at the club, and a standard is a standard. We don't serve bloodline in our fish, so we remove it all. And we charge accordingly for that. That's how we make it up. If you have a high quality product and you stand behind it, people will pay. Okay? So now I've essentially gotten this fish where it's 100% ready to be portioned. Okay? No bloodline. There's a little bit of thin meat that's right here. This thin meat actually just pulls right off. It's not actually attached to the muscle. There's separate ligature. Okay? And now I will trim the belly. This is where my pastry chef thinks, or excuse me, my sushi chef thinks that he goes cuckoo when he sees us do this. Because in the sushi world, this fatty belly is the most prized. Even in salmon, specifically in tuna. The name of the tuna, for some reason, is eluding me. But that's the Japanese fatty tuna. I can't remember the Japanese word right now. But that's where you buy that tuna by the gram. We buy it, and when we buy it, it's called toro. I don't know, I was having a brain fart. Toro is bought by the gram, and you can have separate grades of toro, and that's the fatty belly of the tuna. I just cut off the fatty belly of the salmon. And if you notice, that didn't go in this bin. This goes in the trash. This goes to be utilized somewhere else. This portion of the belly could go in numerative things, so you just never want to throw away good product. You always want to save the product. Now I have at the tip, and this is always something else that I personally do, the very tip right there, I just always cut that off, always. There's always a little piece of bone, there could be a little par piece of the pin bone in there, so that too, and then that just goes in the trash, okay? And now here again, because I said I'm going to block cut this fish, I'm going to show you how we block cut that. I'm going to cut this tail piece off here first, and we can then serve this in one of two ways. This is about a 6 or 7 ounce piece of fish. I do have a scale here, they're brand new, and I'm not going to put a piece of fish on it for the first time. I've been doing this for many years, but whenever you portion fish, you need to utilize using a portion scale, okay? This piece right here is about 6.5 ounces for sure, and there's two ways that we can then serve this, okay? It could be folded over, and you could use Ajinomoto, which is meat glue or something, but no need. The protein will naturally glue itself together, and then there we have one beautiful portion of salmon. Now, let's cut down, and actually I fibbed. I am going to get the scale, just to show you. For this, we use a spring scale. I like to use a company called Edland. I think that they make the best spring scales. We also do have digital scales. This just happened to be a scale that was close. So, one way you can see, to block cut this fish, I've cut it in half. And now I can take this, you can fold this fish this way. You can't move it this way. I don't know how to explain that, but it will break the muscle up. But if you're folding it this way, it will not. So I can put this on here. I'm going to do some math, okay? That's 21 ounces, okay? What's 21 divided by 3? 7. So that means I got 3 perfect 7-ounce portions out of that. This top portion is usually always much fatter. I bet I'll get at least 4 portions and then a few half portions too as well. Here at the club, we offer a lot of things in half portions as well, and we also have a slightly different portion size for lunch. It also really helps me utilize the other areas. So this piece weighs 29 ounces, okay? 7 times 4, 28. I'm gonna get 4 really nice pieces out of that. One might be a bit heavy. But when you know that, then you don't have to guess. There's no guessing. And the second you guess wrong, you've just lost several ounces. So it's very important to weigh your fish when it's in a whole format here. And then it's just a matter of doing math and using your eyesight, okay? That is 4 beautiful a la carte pieces of salmon ready for service. And now I'm rebuilding this fish so you can see what this fish would look like whole on this side. Now again here, this I measured, this, even though the pieces look bigger, it's all about weight. Now that is the entire salmon, head to toe, portioned. Almost 100% yield on the fillet. In terms of meaning, I didn't have a lot of trim pieces that we weren't able to utilize. And sometimes you do get those funky pieces, and it's okay if you have 2 or a 4 ounce, but you want to try to get to a round number that you can utilize in your restaurant. Okay? So for this portion of the demo, that will culminate the salmon. Again, to reiterate, we butchered a West Ross Atlantic salmon. I showed you our standard method for butchery for an a la carte setting in a 7-ounce portion, bloodline removed. All right, here we are, round 2. As promised, I'm going to show you a flatfish butchery on a 40 or 50 pound halibut. I don't know, it was a little bit heavier than I thought getting it up here. But one of the first things that I saw on this fish that I want to show you is right here. This is a great example of what we talked about in the first demo of the salmon, right here. If you'll notice that line, tell me if you don't mind taking it and scrolling over to that Lexan with the ice in it, okay? That line was from where this fish just laid out on the Lexan, okay? So it gets back to showing you how delicate all fish, and especially fresh fish is, you need to take care of it at all times. And we'll see that, and when we butcher probably, we'll notice that there's an issue right here from where this thing laid over in the ice bin, because obviously this thing is, it's not a monster. We butchered 100-pound halibuts. This is about 40 or 50 pound. It is a fat halibut though, for sure. Okay, so this halibut is an Alaskan halibut. This halibut we bought from a company out of Charleston, that they get them airdropped in from Alaska. Occasionally, I also buy from 2 or 3 other companies, door to dock, direct, sea to table, meat and fish company. There's several other companies that are out there, especially on the West Coast, with the advances in shipping technology and just technology in general. It's given me, as the chef, direct access to get some of these fish drop shipped directly. And in certain times we do, but literally I decided to do this demo today based on my schedule. So I called my local vendor, and he's actually been able to come through with some really beautiful fish for us. Okay? So now, also in full transparency, I didn't say this in the last demo, I really haven't butchered a salmon or a halibut in quite a while. So I'm fairly comfortable with the salmon and equally comfortable with the halibut, but if there is anything that you might see a small knife slip on, it may be here. Okay, so again, this is a flatfish, this is a halibut. I typically always like to do this with the the green or brown side of the fish facing up. Again, they call this a flatfish because it swims flat. This is a bottom fish. This lives on the bottom. If you look on the other side of this fish here, and we can lift this up just a little bit if we support it with my left hand, it's totally white, meaning that this thing kind of lives on the bottom like this and gets things that are coming at to the base. If you saw a flounder, the exact same thing. Halibut just looks like essentially like a big flounder. Same thing. Also, you get into Dover sole. There is a little bit of a different butchery method, but again, mostly the same process. Finally, also too, whenever you get large fish, halibut typically, but anything that's coming from Alaska or somewhere else, it's always usually going to be headed and gutted, because those heads and guts weigh a lot of weight, and it costs just as much to ship those as it does the good meat. So this fish is headed and gutted, and that's why I've been rubbing my hands over this and checking. It also has been scaled. So this is scaled. So this fish actually arrived the way that I ordered. Okay? So now, first step, Tommy, can they see on the camera? Can they see that little line right there? Do you see that? Okay? That line is essentially the line where the spine is at in the center. There's several ways that you can take this fish off. We could use what I consider or call the up and over method that I use on certain round fish, where we could come in here, come up over the spine, and come down in one large fillet. But that's typically not how most folks like to do flatfish. I do it in that method if it's a very small flatfish, like a very small Dover sole or a sand dabs or a Rex sole, a different smaller fish, then yes. But in all these larger fish, or even anything that's not a baby, typically you're going to want to take these fillets off in 4 quarters. Okay? Now again, you'll notice my mise en place in terms of my kitchen tools is the exact same. I have the exact same knife, and I have a bench knife, and I have no need really here for the tweezers because this fish does not possess pin bones like a salmon does. Okay? So without any further ado, first I'm going to come here and I'm going to find the spine, and I'm going to check and it matches, it lines up with the bone here. I'm going to come in with confidence. I just broke through the collar right there, okay? And this is where, again, you do it with confidence, okay? You come in, you find the spine, I found it, and I can feel it with my knife. I could do this with my eyes closed, okay? And I'm not suggesting that you do, but I am using my senses to feel what's going on down here with my hands. I'm just using my eyes to make sure that I'm staying centered. Okay? That's the first step. Now, I don't know if we can get this angle or not. Can we get directly over the fish? Can you see that? Do you see the spine? I can't tell if you can see it or not. So there's the spine is right here. I'm directly on it. Okay, I'm actually over it, so I'm gonna now, the next step, I'm gonna come right in here and I'm gonna take this fillet off all in one motion. Flatfish, in my opinion, are much easier to butcher and fillet than almost any round fish. Now, here we are again. You got an opportunity to see the spine. Now I'm going to remove this fillet from here. And again, that is why I have a flexing knife. Okay? You could also use a fillet knife here, for sure. I kind of like to use this bigger. This almost is like a big fillet knife. My sushi chef, not obviously, but you know, most of the thing is Asian, and he uses an Asiatic knife and a completely different technique to do all of his fish than the way that I was taught. And the reason I say that is there's no right or wrong way to do this. So here, because I don't want to cut into that flesh, I'm going to actually start down here at the tail so I can get a little bit of leverage. And just coming in right from the top. Working back to front. Typically I like to take this thing off on the front. Just how large my knife was here, I want to come off back this way so it gives me a little bit of leverage to then come up here and remove the rest of this fillet and get a nice yield. But as you'll notice, every time I'm doing this, I'm using the entirety of the knife. I'm not using the tip of the knife. And I'm trying my darndest to make very fluid motion with this fish as I'm butchering it. Okay? Right here, I actually went a little bit too far there, which is fine, because none of that is usable. Here is 1/4 of the fillet that I actually, for the most part, I think did a pretty good job on. My knife slipped here one time, and I'll be able to show you how to fix that there, but that is a pretty good, solid fillet. All right, here we are. So now to kind of check your scorecard when you're taking the fish off, you can see that there's not a lot of hacking or really any hacking, because I did this all in, a lot of times I like to take it off literally in one motion with the knife. This fish, to get the first fillet off was a little bit tough to do. But you can come back again and see, and sometimes, you know, when the chef comes up and he might see someone butchering, you just look at the carcass and that'll tell you how well they did or didn't do. The only area that I did slip up a little bit on, which you all saw right at the end, was I did cut through the rib cage and just a little bit into the other fillet, but mostly it's all fin meat, so no harm there, really, no foul. Okay? Now, onto the second side. Now here, right there with my finger, and I kind of pushed in there, that's your spine. So, I'm going to come up over that, using a portion of the up and over method, just to get it off the spine, just a little bit. Actually, I want to clean that off just again, almost like how we did the salmon. I took off, this is where his head was, so I wanted to cut that off. That actually could be usable. I'm going to save that. Now, if you saw what is typically how it should come off. This entire fillet pretty much just got cut off in one solid motion, and you can see it right there. Okay? Still pretty good. I did miss a little bit. You can bring your knife back and see. I missed just a touch there, a little bit rusty. But that's pretty much it, and again, that's usable trim. So that can go in your usable trim container. Okay? And now this fillet is removed, except the skin is still on one side, and that's all fin meat right there. You literally just can cut right to release the fillet. Now the fillet is released. And there is one whole side of an an Alaskan halibut. Okay, welcome back. So what I've done thus far now is I've removed all four sides of the fish, and I wanted to show you the carcass. Again, you really don't need to pay attention as much to the fin meat. I left some of the fin meat on and then since cut that off the fillet. But really what I want you to focus on here is this portion of the fish. I did not bring my scissors with just because we're in a quasi-satellite environment right now. But I would take my Joyce Chen scissors or a butcher's cleaver, and I would clean off these fins here. I'd clean off these fins here. Probably even use a knife, maybe not. If not, you can cut down right through here, and then you can break the bone, okay, to pull that off. And in a lot of settings, some folks would like to use this, and you can, but to make a really, really nice traditional fumet, we don't want fins, we just want bones, okay, and cartilage from the bones. So I would cut a portion of the off here, I would cut this off here, and then in here, this is where the bloodline is at. I would soak this, remove the bloodline from the fish, and by soaking it in water before I would make the fumet. And then typically what we do to store these then is literally you can just break the spine, and also too, when you break the spine, there's that jelly that's inside of the spinal fluid, a lot of the collagen that's in there. That's what's going to eventually give you that really nice gelatinous stock or fumet that we're looking for. So then this will come back. And now to culminate, I want you to, if you can tell me when you have a moment, come back and I want you to look at the board. This is what a board typically really looks like after you've just butchered a huge 40-pound fish. So it's not perfectly clean. But what I'm going to do is take just a few moments, wipe my board down just like I would normally if I was working in a production setting. And then when we come back, I will show you how to skin one side and portion one side of the fish. And that will then culminate our demo. Okay, so to finish this halibut demo, we have the first quarter side that I demonstrated taking off. Still has some of the fin meat left on, all the skin, and a portion, I think that's actually like the collarbone still that's on there. So, and then again too, this is that one little area I told you that I did slip on. And I'll show you how we'll fix that for the sake of this demo. Okay, again, I'm right-handed. I like to skin this way. And again, a similar technique. Use the back of your knife, starting, and then move forward. And I'm actually pulling really hard on this skin. Okay, halibut is a pretty tough fish. It has very leathery skin, so you can be a little bit more rough with it, get away with it. If it was a Dover sole or a trout or something, maybe not quite as much. But again, we'll look at my scorecard here. Scorecard looks really good, and the only areas that I caught, which are the ones I wanted to, was a little bit of that bloodline. And that's right. Every fish has a bloodline, and almost every fish has to have it removed. Not every fish. If it's a small fish, maybe not, but almost every large fish, bloodline in this kitchen is removed. Okay, back onto the other side. You'll see here this stuff that looks like it's holding on like jelly. That's just connective tissue, unwanted connective tissue, and fin meat. Okay. You can see there was a little piece of the skin that actually stayed on here because it was connected to that collar. I should have cut that collar off before I skinned it. That's all right that I didn't. I'm just going to flex that back and then trim there. Okay, and then now you'll see there's still bloodline on this fish. You can see that's where I cut some of it off when I was skinning it, and this is where I left some on. So you cannot achieve this without a sharp knife. It's like peeling back a piece of paper, essentially. And then once you get to the edge, cut through. I actually just slipped again and took a little bit more off than I wanted there. It's okay though. Take this down and then just trimming up on the top, there's a little bit more fin meat. Okay, so now, you notice again how I'm touching and utilizing the fish. Here, to clean this up, I literally, and just in an even stroke, I am just going to eat a little bit of a loss on that to square up the fillet so it looks nice and clean, but that still goes in our usable trim box that's now on our ice because it's been out for a little while. I want to keep that nice on ice, nice and cold. Same at the top, just a little bit of a trim up. Okay, now halibut is obviously a little bit different because when we buy salmon, especially farm-raised salmon, they come specced. Meaning I buy 5 and up, 6 and up, so I can kind of get a little bit more particular in what I get. Mother Nature doesn't just produce the same style fish. So we have to use a little bit of a different technique into portioning the fish. So again, I have my nice scale here. Honestly, I should have this wrapped in plastic, but in full transparency, there's no plastic wrap in this kitchen yet. So I brought a couple pieces of parchment from one of my other production kitchens. Pardon, I didn't have that done properly, but we're going to cover that because we don't want any cross-contamination on the scale. Again, for here I'm looking for 6 ounces, not 7. I'm going to give myself just a first gauge to see on the tail piece. Again, I've been doing this a while. I think that that is about right. And again, you can see I'm a little over 7. It's always better on your first cut to be a little heavy. If you're a little under, you can't put it back on. But if there's a little bit more, we can trim a little off. And I have a little piece of that tail there that I wouldn't want to serve really anyway in a high-end fine dining setting. So I'll cut that off. I've got my beautiful fish ready to go. And I've got my mise en place right under the table. Everything in its place. Perfect. Okay? And now I'm going to start cutting. Portioning. Okay? That's perfect. That's right on 6 ounces. So I can utilize that as a bit of a gauge, but you have to be careful because the fish gets a lot wider as it comes up. Now, the same thing on this side, I'm going to trim up a little bit here. Usable trim bin. I'm going to take 1 6-ounce fillet off the top. Honestly, I think I might have undercut that just a little bit, which I did. It's a 5-ounce piece. I'm kind of glad that that happened. You can see that's a perfect example of why. Now this piece, I just lost 5 ounces. If it was 7, I would have only lost 1 ounce. Now I lost 5. But I didn't really lose it. We're still going to be able to utilize that in several other fashions. We have cioppino on the menu in certain venues and different restaurants that I have. So nothing, like I said, again, goes to waste. So now that the fillet, Tommy, you can see here, it's starting to get really fat. Now, if I just don't cut this down the center, each of my portions are going to be like that for 6 ounces. And the perceived value is going to be that we're not giving them a good portion. And perception is reality, especially in a restaurant. So we're going to cut this down the middle. And again, as the salmon, this now lets me put this all just on my scale. Okay, that tipped the scale at like 34 ounces. Okay, so I'm going to try to get 5 nice portions out of this fish. We'll check our math and see. Should work. There you go. 6.5-ounce pieces. All the way down. I'm going to take those here and I'll lay them out for you here so you can see again the whole fillet nicely portioned, or half of it. And now here on this side again, this is the top side. This is going to be a lot heavier. I bet you we'll get 6 portions out of this, maybe even 7. Okay, that literally has 0 to scale out. And this is a 32-ounce scale, so that's probably about 38 ounces. 6 times 6, 36, like I said, I'm going to be able to get 6. So knowing that, 6 is an even number as opposed to an odd number. Even numbers tend to be your better friend. You can kind of cut this more in half here, and then I can get 3 even pieces out of that fish. And there you have it. Now just a little bit, we're going to do a little bit of math here real quickly. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's 13 pieces out of one of the sides, or one, it's not even a side, it's a quarter of a side. So 13 times 4, 26. You know, you're talking basically 50, what, 52? Is that right? Yeah, so 52 portions. I probably paid, and I should know this, I didn't look at the invoice, but I bet you we probably paid around $7 a pound for this fish. It's a 40-pound fish. We're going to make some good money on this fish. So there is money in knowing how to butcher your own fish. I'm going to get 52 portions out of this fish. I'm going to charge no less than $29 for every single piece of this fish in my restaurant. It's going to come with beautiful sides and accompaniments, but that is how, as a chef, if you know butchery, you can take and capture a lot of that extra money and bring that to your bottom line, whether it's your private restaurant, whether it's, you know, a business that I work for. That's how you make dollars, by knowing how to do the base work.